Hello and welcome. You are watching Indian Interest. I'm Krishna Kumar, and today we're talking about the new revised lower GDP growth projections and how it's going to impact you. In a significant move today, the 6-member Monetary Policy Committee of the Reserve Bank of India, led by RBI Governor Shaktikanta, lowered the GDP growth projection for this financial year. The GDP projection now stands at 6.6% compared to an earlier estimate of 7.2%. Remember, the second quarter numbers of the current financial year were out recently, and India's growth numbers were lower than expected. The growth stood at just about 5.5%, 5.4% to be precise, which was a 7-quarter low. Not just that, manufacturing grew at a sluggish 2.2% in the July to September quarter. How will the new revised GDP projection for the current financial year 2025 impact the job market and other things that are important to you? To discuss that, we have Mithali Nikore, founder and chief economist, Nikore Associates, now joining us. Mithali, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. This is the fact of the matter is that India is still very much a growing economy. 6.6% is still a very good number in the context of the larger global growth projections for other countries. But the fact that we're going to be a good 60 basis points lesser than what we thought is certain to impact the job market.
So absolutely, Krishna. I mean, this is something that a lot of us were projecting after the Q2 GDP numbers came in, that there has to be a correction of the projection that we're doing for the annual growth rate as well. Because at the end of the day, if you think about it, we have not achieved close to that target. And at the end of the day, I mean, this is also an election year. This is a year in which the approvals for a lot of the manufacturing sector schemes have not come through. We haven't seen the services sector job growth take up at that level. So I think, it was expected that this is a cyclical downturn in what we call, in classic economic terms. I mean, this is not a reflection of the strength of the Indian economy or the structure of the Indian economy. It is a cyclical kind of downturn. However, at the end of the day, we have to think about ways to get out of this cycle.
Right. The fact of the matter is that, it's not just the GDP number. Look at the number surrounding it. Look at the manufacturing growth number, just 2.2% for the last quarter. Are these, signs of a larger slowdown in the Indian economy?
So, Krishna, I think we have to think about this sector-wise. I mean, when we look at the manufacturing sector, that's the one sector that's gone from 14% growth in 22-23 to 2.2% in 24-25. Now here, what is going on? What is going on is a little bit related to the PLI scheme, right? Where we see that, a lot of proposals came in when the scheme was launched, and now to some extent there's been a slowdown. Definitely, with the government putting in a little bit more effort and with some effort from, organizations like Invest India, again, those proposals are expected to pick up next year. So this is very cyclical in the manufacturing sector. And if we look at the other sectors like agriculture and services, we've actually seen recovery in those sectors coming in, even in Q2, because actually the performance of agriculture in Q2 24-25 was better than Q2 23-24. And similarly for a few other services sectors. So I believe that, this is not a structural impact. This is a completely cyclical kind of impact caused by somewhere the elections and, a little bit of inertia that comes in because of the elections.
Right. As we talk about these numbers, there's also talk of a squeeze in urban spending. Urban Indians are spending less, and that consumption hit is starting to impact the GDP, isn't it?
Exactly, Krishna. And I think that's a very important point that we have to address. It's almost like an elephant in the room when we are talking about income inequality. See, one thing is GDP growth. GDP growth and income inequality in many emerging economies across the world has gone hand in hand. And even when we look at some of the richest economies in the world, I mean, let's look at the US, for example, we know that there is considerable amount of income inequality even in the US, where there's a cost of living crisis on one hand, and on the other hand, you have the tech billionaires, which are rising. And that is, we have to ask ourselves, is that the kind of economy that India wants to be, because we are seeing that even playing out in our country. You have so many unicorns, that are coming up on a daily basis. So many startups doing so well, and yet at the same time, you do have, a cost of living crisis come up in the lower income segments. So somewhere we have to design progressive tax policies. We have to design income redistribution policies to ensure that our growth is deep. It's not only, happening for the top income segments, but it is going down to the middle classes and the lower income communities who can also benefit from this national growth.
Right. The urban spending squeeze is one problem, but the other issue is the economy not performing is faltering. In that sense, in the first half of the year. And there are some hopes that, the numbers could become better, because we're talking about a slowdown or so-called slowdown in the GDP growth in the July to September quarter, after which comes the festival season. Do you think a recovery in the GDP growth rate is possible in the second half of this financial year?
So I think, Krishna, we have to take that with a little bit of pinch of salt. And the reason for that is that if we look at the reasons why GDP growth has actually reduced in this period, one of the major reasons is a slowdown in investment, private capital investment. It's not as much of a slowdown in consumption. Consumption has continued on a very, clear growth trajectory, which has even come in, in Q2 2024. We've seen actually consumption increase by nearly 6%. So, I don't think that it's actually a matter of consumption. Of course, when consumption increases in the festive season, that will benefit GDP growth. But our major problem lies in manufacturing and investment, private sector investment. We have to get private sector investors in. We have to get the FDI, which has, recently left, in record numbers. People have withdrawn from, FIIs have withdrawn from the Indian markets. We have to get that back. And that is only possible when we work with, the manufacturing company, come and invest in India and be here for the long haul, be here to export from India, not only to manufacture in India.
There is talk of a possible stagflation in growth, and many economists denying the fact that there is no stagflation in that sense. There is inflation going up above the dangerous 6% mark, and then you have GDP coming down at the same time below the 6% mark, and this is very difficult even for the Reserve Bank of India to reconcile with, because on one end it is the environment is right for a rate cut to boost growth, but on the other hand, how do you manage inflation? Mitali?
I have a very different. Yeah, hi Krishna, can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
Yeah.
Right, we'll just get back in touch with Mitali, who is helping us understand how the GDP growth at this stage, there is a revision downwards, and how it will impact the fact that this lower GDP growth has been fueled by multiple factors, and has resulted in the Reserve Bank of India lowering the GDP growth projection for the current financial year 2025 to 6.6%. Now on your screens are the quarterly GDP breakdown you have for the last quarter of 2023 Q4. If you compare it, it's 6.18, and for Q1 of FY24, it's 8.24. It is a multi-quarter low of 5.4% that had come out 5.36%. So there it pales in comparison to the kind of low compared to the high GDP growth percentages that have been put up in the recent quarters. The lowest in recent times being 6.18%, and with now, first it was Goldman Sachs, which lowered India's yearly GDP prediction to 6.3%, and now the Reserve Bank of India has revised its GDP growth numbers for the current financial year to 6.6%. This was a follow-up to the 7-quarter low GDP number of 5.4%. And side by side, you see inflation in the recent months from, say, April to October inch up from 4.83 now, up to 6.21%. In fact, there was a reprieve in the months of July and August when the inflation number was below the 4% mark, comfortably in the 3.5% territory, but since then has been climbing steadily up. It's a difficult balancing act for Reserve Bank of India at this stage. We'll take a short breather here at this stage. We'll be back with lots more on the other side.
तो क्या अगर आज सिर्फ 2 हाथों की करामात है, कल कई हाथ सपना बुनेंगे। तो क्या अगर अकेले बीज बोया था, उस एक बीज से बगीचा खड़ा करेंगे। श्री राम फाइनेंस हर इंडियन के साथ खड़ा है, क्योंकि भरोसा है हमें।
जब जुड़ेंगे तभी तो उड़ेंगे।
श्री राम फाइनेंस।
Film and entertainment is definitely one of the levers for any country to build its brand.
We are getting global. I feel that we're just on the takeoff.
More and more films are becoming language agnostic.
Content is a universal language.
There's one audience in the world.
Absolutely. End of the day, we all are like brothers who have mutual respect for each other from a different land.
Heartfelt appreciation to News 9 and TV9 network for organizing Global Summit.
I like to thank TV9 for presenting here a wonderful fusion of politics, industry.
जर्मनी और गुजरात के बीच इस मजबूत संबंध सेतु को न्यूज़ 9 ग्लोबल समिट का आयोजन और भी मजबूत बनाएगा। इस विश्वास के साथ आप सभी को एक बार फिर बहुत बहुत शुभकामनाएं।
I thank TV9 and the government of Germany for organizing this wonderful conference, and I wish you all the very best.
India and Sweden bilateral ties go as far as India's independence.
We have now more than 75 years of diplomatic relations. Green transition is a survival issue for us, for the world, and also for India. Even the small solutions have a big impact. For us, the will to invest in India is already there. India is a country that keeps us busy. The potential is there and we are ready to exploit it. That's actually how you build the culture of bridges.
And this is The Diplomat.
Thank you, Barun Das. I think the entire TV9 team for putting together such a great, fantastic show.
I would like to congratulate TV9 for organizing the first ever News 9 Global Summit, and I'm sure it will be a great success.
It's indeed an immense pleasure and honor for me to be present here in this News 9 Global Summit.
Film and entertainment is definitely one of the levers for any country to build its brand.
We are getting global. I feel that we're just on the takeoff.
More and more films are becoming language agnostic.
Content is a universal language.
There's one audience in the world.
Absolutely. End of the day, we all are like brothers who have mutual respect for each other from a different land.
You are watching In Your Interest, and we have been discussing the GDP numbers. The Reserve Bank of India lowering the GDP growth projection for this financial year. We have Mithali Nikore with us discussing that. Mithali, before we let you go, the simple question at this stage that I have to ask you is this. With the lowering of the GDP number to 6.6%, talk to us in terms of the people watching this broadcast. How do you think it's going to impact them? Tell them, break it down for them. What does it mean for them?
Absolutely, Krishna. And I think I just want to also respond to your question about the inflation. I'm sorry, the network was a little patchy at that point. At the end of the day, I've been studying the inflation numbers, and currently the headline inflation is very much in, the range of 4 to 6%. So that's very much within the RBI, band, which is set at 3 to 6%. So at this point in time, for the RBI to say that, the inflation is simply too high, actually, that's not fully the reason why they are not going ahead with the rate cuts. It's mainly because of the food inflation. So, the headline inflation actually not doing so badly, but the food inflation is the one where, we see those headwinds coming in for, a very high and increasing inflation rate. So, when we think about, a decelerating kind of growth, the picture that you were painting, that maybe growth is slowing down, inflation is going up, that is not happening at a very fast pace. I mean, we are still seeing a very good and healthy growth rate in GDP, one of the fastest in the world. We are still seeing some amount of job creation. We are still seeing that, the RBI is coming out and proactively managing, the inflationary headwinds, especially food inflation. So I think, from all of these points, we can see that the RBI as well as the, central government are really looking at mechanisms for, unlocking new growth pathways. But yes, in the short term, as this cyclical impact takes place, it will be harder to create jobs. It will create, some amount of inelasticity in the job market, that is, looking at ways of creating new jobs, maybe that will not be so fast. So I really think that, the employment impact, and also for entrepreneurs and small businesses, this is a time when there will be a little bit of a slow, amount of activity in the market, and there'll be a slowdown in, new orders that are coming in. So this is something that, an everyday citizen could actually experience, the slowdown in such a way. Maybe the pace will not be as fast, but we are still growing. So there will still be jobs and there will still be, work coming in for entrepreneurs, but maybe it will not be as fast and, quick as it used to be.
Okay. We will leave it at that. Mitali Nikore, founder and chief economist of Nikore Associates, there helping us understand what a new revised lower GDP estimate means. Thank you, Mitali, for taking time out to be with us on this edition of In Your Interest. Shifting focus to India's exports to Bangladesh, which are witnessing a significant dip due to the volatile political and economic situation in the neighboring country. Recent data reveals that India's engineering exports to Bangladesh fell by nearly 8% in the first 7 months of this financial year as compared to the same period last year. Not just that, the exports of imitation jewellery, and those exports to Bangladesh fell to 35%. Now, last year, India's exports to Bangladesh stood at around $11.3 billion. How will they shape up for the current year? How much of a hit will it take on that number? To make sense of that, we have Mr. Rakesh Kar, editor, English News Now Live, now joining us here. Rakeshji, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us. Bangladesh is in crisis mode, and that's, it seems to be like, a situation where the collateral damage seems to be India's exports.
Absolutely, Krishna. I think, it's a smaller problem in the sense that Indian exporters are being hit. The bigger problem is Islamicized, Bangladesh, or a Pakistanized Bangladesh, which is extremely economically vulnerable, makes India extremely difficult, puts India in a very difficult situation. Because if you have neighbors who are not fundamentally economically strong, from Sri Lanka to Nepal, Nepalese leadership is in China asking for grants versus loans, loans versus grants. There is a huge politics playing around that. So the entire region in that sense is economically unstable, politically unstable. From that perspective, India has to be extremely careful about how the situation pans out. My sense is that, when the gentleman who was supposed to lead the interim government came in, he has a huge history of being a top economist. He got a Nobel for his, credit, so to say, originality, distributing credit in a manner that it becomes inclusive. He should learn a few tips from when India got into a crisis in 1991. One of our best economic minds, Manmohan Singh, brought about a paradigm shift in India's economic policy. that is leading to India being one of the fastest growing economies today. So the basic seats were shown in 1991 as one big ticket reform. And when Mohammad Yunus got the Nobel Prize, Manmohan Singh was the first to congratulate him and also say that India has so much to learn from you. I think here is a case for a reversal. It is time that Yunus picks up few threads from the India growth story right from 1991 onwards and looks at Bangladesh from a resurrection point of view. Krishna, you would remember that Bangladesh for quite some time was seen as an island of hope and growth and prosperity, especially not just from pure play economic numbers, but also from the socio-economic indicators. It scored really well, and at times people would talk about India having to learn from Bangladesh on managing its socio-economic indices vis-a-vis growth. So in that sense, there is a challenge we have. Indian exporters being hit, there are massive repercussions of Bangladesh getting extremely vulnerable economically. Moody's has downgraded Bangladesh, as you know. The banks are very fragile. My worry is pressure on domestic debt will increase, and also the banking system has a bigger risk because most of the loans that would have been farmed out in the Sheikh Hasina regime have a difficulty of not being serviced in the next few days. And all global watchdogs in that sense, from an IMF to a Moody's to a rating agencies, they're not too sure about Yunus's capability, to actually execute his commitment to bring about a reform in Bangladesh.
Right, the moment a country goes into crisis, these days, the way the global economy is, the focus always ends up being on the economic ties. And in that sense, I want to ask, Bangladesh also became a crucial strategic place for manufacturers across the world. The kind of factories that Bangladesh was able to sell, all your designer clothes that Bangladesh was making. In that sense, there could be, then many exporters, who are looking to say move out of Bangladesh because of the situation coming into India as well.
Well, I mean, that situation is possible, and first and foremost, Bangladesh's own economy, if it gets into trouble vis-a-vis manufacturing as a per se, one particular division, which was its strongest point in terms of textiles. I mean, I remember having, going to Sri Lanka and picking up a shirt, it was made in Bangladesh. So, that's the story which might not run that far now. Yes, economically vulnerable Bangladesh means bad news for India.
Economically vulnerable Bangladesh is bad news for India, but what do you think India needs to do at this stage to ensure that the impact of whatever happens in Bangladesh is kept to minimal or nil? Because at the end of the day, India has its own growth path to follow, irrespective of whether it's the cross-border trade with Bangladesh goes up or goes down. So India will need to find alternatives to all that it's been doing with Bangladesh.
Krishna, the good news is that in this spectrum of bad news, the good news is that Vikram Misri, the foreign secretary, is scheduled to go to Bangladesh on 9th. I think, apart from the minorities attack issue, which is on the political side, I think high on table should be, ideally, and I'd guess it would be, the economic issues. India must sustain its economic interest in Bangladesh and not abandon it. So there would be a short-term hit, like we know what's happening with Adani's on the power, generation company. And it's up for review from the the Bangladeshi side, and it is also a issue of non-payment for the services rendered. So I think there's need for not a suicidal kind of a reaction. People should stay put, stay invested. All Indian companies, whether it's exporters, manufacturers, service-led companies which are active in Bangladesh, and India has invested as one particular unit in Bangladesh over the last so many decades, they should stay put, take the hit in the interim, and the government of India in the meantime should try and bring about bridging the gap that has happened unfortunately in the last few months. While Mohammad Yunus, the caretaker interim head, should announce elections, because Bangladeshis have equally right to democracy, and that is the first big step which will bring about that confidence, restore that confidence in the international community led by India.
Restore confidence in the international community. India is the voice of the global south, and in that sense, it'll after a point the world will look upon India to manage the situation as the voice of the global south.
Absolutely, I think India has to play a stellar role. It is hit in the interim, as I said, because it has a right to protect minorities, and the global community and the leadership should articulate its concern more vociferously than it is doing right now. Barring Donald Trump, who was the first, as even before he was elected, he had articulated his pain and anguish. I think all what I call the I5, the big P5 countries, should step up pressure on Mohammad Yunus to really be noble that he is awarded for.
Right. All right, we'll leave it at that. We're completely out of time over here. Rakesh Kar, thank you so much for taking time out to be with us and helping us understand how the Bangladesh crisis has a strong impact on India's economy and how it can be avoided. And with that, we're out of time here. Thank you so much for watching. This is Krishna Kumar signing off.
Thank you, Krishna.
Considered a wonderful product when it was invented. It solved many problems of human lives. We are talking about plastic.
Did you know the plastic in your house is as old as the oldest person in your family?
India almost produces somewhere around 9.3 million metric tons of plastic every year.
It is not dissolving, it is not evaporating, it is not vanishing from sight, it is just breaking down into our soil and ocean. So plastic is just going to be there.
So we need to go back to the questions, we need to go back to the start. When did water bottles come to our consciousness? Why was it marketed like that?
This and more. Streaming on News 9 Plus. News is now content. Subscribe and get free vouchers.
Bollywood is Indian mainstream. That narrative needs to change.
More local is more global.
Korean drama phenomenon followed by Korean pop is amazing.
Today is all about who's making the best content.
I just want to have your thoughts on the future of creativity.
Every technology comes with a lot of arenas, new avenues for us to explore.
India and Sweden bilateral ties go as far as India's independence.
We have now more than 75 years of diplomatic relations. Green transition is a survival issue for us, for the world, and also for India. Even the small solutions have a big impact. For us, the will to invest in India is already there. India is a country that keeps us busy. The potential is there and we are ready to exploit it. That's actually how you build the cultural bridges.
This is The Diplomat.